In Vancouver, they had to arrest the same 40 offenders 6,000 times in 1 year.
Yeah, well, that's exactly a consequence of that specialization. Right?
When we did this last time in the Harper government, we actually reduced crime by 25%. But interesting, this is a very big surprise, incarcerations went down because the people that we kept in prison were in and out anyway. It was like the Hotel California. They were checking out, but they were never really leaving. So we had to basically save them a bed. But secondly, the small-time offenders were actually deterred. You know, all of the so-called experts say deterrents don't work. No, they do work.
Yeah, the best deterrent turns out to be probability of conviction rather than length of sentence.
And right now, though, it's worse than that. Even if you have a probability of conviction, there's a certainty that there won't be any real penalty.
Right.
So it
so
doesn't
that's not
matter.
a real conviction.
That's not a real conviction. There's going to be a very serious crackdown on crime.
Immigration? What's the scoop there?
Oh, we have to slow down the numbers. There's no doubt about it. We have to end the fraud in the international student and the temporary foreign worker program. We have to...
Well, Canada historically had a very effective immigration policy.
We just have to get back to the best system in the world, which we had for 150 years. Even in the United States, both Democrats and Republicans used to say, they'd get up at a microphone and claim they were going to replicate our system because it was an undeniable success. Immigration was not even controversial before Justin Trudeau because it was so well managed here for so long. And we just need to get back to that system.
It was clearly viewed as a net benefit by the immigrants and by Canadians.
Absolutely. In fact, the support for immigration was strongest in kind of the rural, resource, and agricultural communities where the labor was most needed and welcomed. And people integrated, they arrived here, and while we said to people, look, bring your traditions and culture and your stories, but leave the problems at the door. And this is, by the way, a history for Canada that goes back hundreds of years. I mean, the Protestants and Catholics were ripping each other's eyeballs out in Europe for centuries. And then they came to Canada and they got along. They ultimately ended up intermarrying and integrating completely. And, whether you were an Orangeman or a Catholic, Irish Catholic, you over time, you got along with your neighbor. And, in the last 9 years, we've seen that's come apart. The foreign conflicts are now spilling onto our streets. I want to put an end to that. I want to say, look, we're not interested in the world's ethno-cultural conflicts. We welcome people.
Shadow side of multiculturalism.
We welcome the people who come from places that have been afflicted by war, as long as they leave the war behind. And frankly, most people come here to get away from those things. So by getting back to a common sense of values and identity and reminding people that when they get here, they are Canadian first, Canada first. Leave the hyphens. We don't need to be a hyphenated society. We need to be...
So we can abandon the post-nationalist state rhetoric and presume that Canada does have a Western identity founded on the a priori principles of Western democracies, and that is a uniting ethos for the people that come here.
And that we owe a debt of gratitude to the giants who came before us, who fought in wars, who laid down a parliamentary democracy, and who left us behind this incredible inheritance. Yeah, I mean, we're going to be grateful again, and we're going to inculcate the values of gratitude for our incredible history, build up the country, celebrate what we have in common rather than obsessing about what divides us, focusing on the shared values that make us all Canadian. And I think in so doing, we can, and by the way, put aside race, this obsession with race that wokeism has reinserted.
Invented even.
Invented in many ways.
When I moved to Toronto, it was as race blind as any country, as any city could be. Right. And that's flipped. And it's flipped because of that obsessive concern with race, right? That was something we 100% did not need in Canada, right? We basically, what would you say, imported and invented racism in Canada. Right.
Well,
as a consequence of policy.
Wokeism seeks to divide people into these different groups and subgroups, and we see the results in a 250% increase in hate crimes.
His deputy prime minister resigned last week in a cloud of catastrophic, surreal manipulation. He shuffled his cabinet this week. At least a third of his caucus doesn't have any confidence in him, but he's being propped up by the socialists, Jagmeet Singh in particular, who also continually proclaims publicly that he is an opponent of the Trudeau government and is standing up against him, while refusing categorically to do anything, to do the thing that's actually in his power to bring down the government. So do you want to, I just can't understand this at all. So do you want to walk us through this?
Well, let's first of all shed a brief tear for Jagmeet Singh, because the problem he has is that he's trying to be an NDP leader and we already have an NDP prime minister. I mean, Justin Trudeau is, he's actually much more radical than the traditional NDP.
As the NDP themselves admit, the previous leaders of the NDP.
Yes, he attacked the NDP Trudeau attacked the NDP for being too conservative.
Yep.
But because he had the comfortable blanket of the Liberal Party, which governed for most of the last century, people didn't realize what kind of radical they were dealing with. Yeah. The second problem Jagmeet Singh has is that all of his political ideology is implemented now. So, and we're seeing it. Like, people look around and say, okay, this is what it looks like. The utopia the NDP has been spinning in the corner of Parliament. They told us everything was going to be free and wonderful and just, and there would be
racial equity.
There would be, there would be unicorns and butterflies and rainbows, and this would be the utopia. Well, now that all of their policy agenda, all of their agenda is implemented, and people look around and it's a hellscape. Mm-hmm. We have 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario, 35 in Halifax. We have hate crimes are up 253% in the last 9 years. The military is decimated. Wages are dropping. Like, it's the list goes on. And so Jagmeet Singh is trying to disown that ideology, even though that it belongs to him. And he's trying to unsuccessfully to convince people that he's somehow different than that, when in fact Trudeau has only been doing what Singh would have done in his place. And so it is a classic for socialists. What they try to do is change their names and move on and try to have everyone forget their past. And when I say that socialists changed their names, I mean, they were communists, and then they became socialists, and then they became social democrats, and then they stole the word liberal, and then they ruined that word, so they changed their name to progressives, and then they changed their name to woke, and now they claim they don't want to be called woke anymore. Because socialists always try to disown the things they've done because it's manifestly disastrous, and that is what Singh is trying to do, while simultaneously keeping Trudeau's government going. He voted just a couple of weeks ago against a non-confidence motion that I put forward, which contained Singh's own criticisms of Trudeau in Singh's own words. So he voted against his own words to keep Trudeau in power. But I will remind people.
How do you account for that from a motivational perspective? I mean, the scuttlebutt in the Canadian press is that Singh is propping up the government for personal reasons, say, regarding his pension. Now, you're making a much more political case. But what I can't understand how he can reconcile himself to himself, because what he does is so at odds with what he says that it couldn't be more different. Like, if he allied him, the other thing I can't figure out, maybe you can shed some light on this, is like, when Singh agreed to act as Trudeau's support, why the hell didn't he negotiate a cabinet seat? I mean, why didn't he make it into a formal coalition? I know that's not a traditional Canadian move, but it could happen. And so he sold his soul to Trudeau, fundamentally, decimated his own party, and gained nothing in return including what he could have gained had he bargained properly. That's how it looks to me. And what do you think about that?
I mean, he's not a very good negotiator, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And what you're seeing is all of these egomaniacs in both the NDP and what we now call the Liberal Party are turning on each other because they all want to disown their collective record. All of them want to say, oh, I wasn't part of this.